I want to thank you all for being here today, and I'm hoping I'm going to be able to bring you a new tool for your toolbox today in talking about citizen science applications. You can find the information that I'm going to give you on my slides through Monarch Watch website, Monarch Joint Venture website, and through the mlmp.org website, as well as a citizen science handout that I'll put on the share table for you. What is citizen science exactly? Well, citizen science has multiple origins as well as differing concepts, but for our purposes today, I want to define citizen science as recruiting members of the general public to engage in scientific work, often and mostly in collaboration or under the direction of professional scientists and scientific institutions. In other words, crowdsourcing amateur scientists. The slide here also defines further, we can mobilize the public to participate in the scientific process. This is going to be important as we mobilize the public in our projects and efforts in landscape restoration. We can also identify research questions. We can collect and analyze data. We can make new discoveries, we hope. We can develop technologies and applications in the field. But why is it important? I'll give you reasons why citizen science research is important in the scientific field, but I'd like to give you a few reasons why citizen science is important to the people in this room today. I think that we need to ensure our research, our assets, and our financial obligations that we're putting forth in these landscape restoration processes. In order to do this, we need some sort of continuation in the projects that we're looking for. So it is important in research, but we want to protect these assets too. So we have in citizen science a way to measure returns in monitoring documents that citizen sciences will produce for us. We also have a continuity when citizen science projects are encouraged and implemented in our projects. So we want to ensure the future of the protected area management needs that we see. We want to create the collaborations between our stakeholders, create the effective ways of engaging stakeholders in our management process, and we want to transmit to succeeding generations the importance, the knowledge, and the commitment necessary to protect the special places that we're preparing for them for the future. There's a question sometimes about the validity and the success of citizen science. And in 2013, President Obama's administration actually produced citizenscience.gov, which is an official government website designed to accelerate the use of crowdsourcing and citizen science across the United States. They actually recognized the value of citizen science in its 2013 Second Open Government National Action Plan, in which President Obama called on agencies to harness the ingenuity of the public to participate in real-world citizen science issues and projects through innovative methods such as citizen science. So who are the stakeholders in our citizen science projects? Well, we can name a few here. They're land management agencies, they're regional communities, there are government associations, they're private landowners that we talked about this morning. There are cities and metro areas, certainly. There are scout organizations, there are senior living centers, there are children's schools and student organizations that we are so passionate about. I think that we can also choose some of our volunteer groups for citizen scientists from our stakeholder groups, and we've done that many times before. The 4 projects that I want to focus on in terms of citizen science are Journey North, which you've heard a little bit here from Kristen Baum and a few others. Monarch Watch, of course, with Chip Taylor out of the University of Kansas. The Monarch Larval Monitoring Project out of the University of Minnesota, and Project Monarch Health, which is a new but very important project which monitors OE, or Ophthostis electroceres, and it took me a really long time to learn how to pronounce that, so I hope you appreciate that effort. Thank you. Okay, so Journey North, we've heard about this a little bit, but I'm going to go over it for a couple of reasons, because this has been really inclusive in childhood education. And Journey North, essentially volunteers are reporting sightings of monarchs, milkweed roosts, and eggs to Journey North. The entries are displayed on these real-time maps that you've all seen. It's quite useful for tracking monarch populations throughout the breeding season, and it's an accurate representation of monarch migration in the fall and spring. One takeaway from this for your stakeholders and the volunteers that you choose to bring into your projects is that it's a bit of an instant gratification for them, that when they report to Journey North, that moment in time, they can see their report on this map as it's going on. The other thing about Journey North in terms of education is that it's widely considered a best practices model for education, and that Journey North is actually the nation's premier citizen science project for children. So I think that's also important as we consider schoolyard gardens in the urban and suburban environment as well as elsewhere. So the Monarch Watch tagging program. I'm really, really excited about this program for a couple of reasons. We can do demo tagging programs, which are a great draw to some of the project areas that you might want to do. I love to have kids involved in field science for several reasons, because one, at my age, they're closer to the ground, they have smaller hands, and their eyes are really good. And so you can almost assure some sort of success in your tagging program. But Monarch Watch tags programs east of the Rocky Mountains in an attempt to sort of learn more about their migratory patterns. A small tag is adhered to the monarch's hind wing before the migratory monarch is released. We can also tag home rears, so childhood educators and so forth can also tag the monarchs that they rear. Tags that are recovered are reported back to Monarch Watch, and the distance and the flight path of the monarch are uncovered and returned there. So the hook here for gratification for those projects is that you actually receive a certificate of appreciation when your tag's recovered. So once the Monarch Watch tag is recovered, they enter the tag and the recovery information into the recovery database, and they use that tag record to search for the tagging data, and they also enter that information. They then calculate the distance traveled by that particular monarch, and once the data is complete, they contact the tagger to share the information. I've known adults that get really excited about receiving a certificate of appreciation from Monarch Watch. Chip talked earlier about the data coming soon, about Monarch Watch tagging data, and I'm really excited to see that information come through. I think it's going to be really important in terms of finding out how these animals move. I think that urban and suburban gardens and projects are going to be important to monarch science, but I also think that we see a real lack of information in rural areas. And so we really need to kind of upgrade our rural monarch citizen science projects there. If you looked at some of those maps earlier, you saw way stations in urban and suburban areas and so forth. So we really do have to think about bringing citizen science to outlying areas as well. The Monarch Larval Monitoring Project, here's your certificate of appreciation, which is, I think, frameable material. And I still haven't got one, by the way, and I have tagged hundreds of monarchs. I don't know what's happening with that. I do a lot of home rears, and they say Texas home rears aren't usually a recoverable item. Well, okay. So the Monarch Larval Monitoring Project. The goal of this project is basically to understand how these monarch populations vary in time and space. Now, that's a pretty large goal. But we want the focus on monarch distribution. So the data collected from these monitoring citizens allows researchers to ask very specific questions and use that volunteer-gathered data to answer them. So ecological, ecological niche monitoring can also be used to determine the monarch's range in future scenarios by using the current recorded presence of monarchs reported by volunteers. But why are we monitoring monarchs? Well, their large spatial and temporal range make volunteer contributions necessary to answer population level questions. And monarchs are an ecosystem indicator, but here's your hook for your project. The ecosystem indicator. The health of the monarch population serves as a symbolic representation of the health of our land. The monarch's decline is an indication that we're facing serious environmental issues that need to be addressed. So this is something that really inspires your volunteers. The monarchs are flagship species. The flagship species means that the monarchs serve as an ambassador for a specific ecosystem. I think we're all aware of that through some great presentations this weekend that we're speaking to monarchs here, but we know that monarchs are an ambassador. They're an ambassador to a larger issue or environmental cause. So in this case, the habitat loss is due to development and changes in agricultural practices. And some of the practical reasons that we do this are obviously the decline, and monitoring is a great conservation tool. So if we can partner our citizen scientists with our stakeholders, we're looking at successive generations being able to provide a continuation on these projects. Now, one of the things that I run into most often is the failure of a project due to lack of continuation. So in other words, if you build a schoolyard garden and your teacher moves on to math instead of science, and your project fails, and your garden is abandoned. Citizen science is a way that you can pass on the continuation of your project to a new stakeholder, a new science teacher, or a new vice principal, for instance, in this indication. With landowners, you have sometimes generations of families that will pass it on to their grandchildren or their children, such as the Langford family, which I know your kids are already monitoring over there. So this is a tool that we can use to bring continuation to our projects, and I can't stress that enough, that it provides very important research. Some of these citizen science labs and staffs are so tiny, there are 2 or 3 people, along with one great scientist, doing a lot of the research work, and they can't be everywhere, but we can be. And so we can bring our stakeholders, and we can bring our volunteers, and we can bring this data to places that they could never get to. And some great grad students are out there doing some work, and those kinds of volunteers. So I think that when we look at these kinds of projects and we start to pull from volunteer groups, we can gain enthusiasm and a continuity that hasn't been there before. So I want to talk about Project Monarch Health a little. This is a really fairly new project out of the University of Georgia, and we're all kind of familiar with the whole OE thing, and we talked about that in the last couple of days. Monarch Health is the citizen science project, which volunteer samples monarch abdomens specifically, and they study this OE parasite, and it's for a broader understanding basically of the host parasite infection, and they track that infection, and they want to know the rate of the parasitism basically in this country. So you're basically testing abdomens of the monarch butterfly, and it's a fairly easy thing to do, and again, I stress bringing children in to this. We do release these monarchs. When you're checking for the OE, I'm not going to try and say it twice. When you're checking for OE in your monarch, you're basically taking a sticky surface like a tape. You can actually go to the Monarch Health website, and they will send you a testing kit for your volunteers. You check for the OE by testing the abdomen site with that sticky surface. You can send the samples back to the lab, so you have your validation from your science and your science-oriented group. They'll share the results with you almost immediately. You'll hear back from them about whether or not you have a healthy population in your project site. So we're also using those results in further research and able to share that data nationally with other interested groups. Monarch Joint Venture actually pulled together this interesting kind of result-oriented paragraph on the handout that I'll share with you at the share table in the gallery. And one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting about this was how much citizen science has already contributed to research. So if I'll break it down for you, basically, that the data generated by the citizen scientists allowed researchers a little more room to grow. So they essentially were able to answer questions that couldn't have been considered using traditional academic research methods. They were engaging in actions that had important conservation outcomes. This gave a lot of the volunteers a real feeling of belonging or becoming the scientists. When you feel like you're becoming part of the job, part of the project, part of the science world, you become much more invested in your project. And so I think this is the hook from citizen science. You don't want to be the only person invested in your project. You want all of your stakeholders invested. You want your volunteers invested. You want all of the people that are involved to continue with the project. You don't want it to fail in 2.5 years. So what you're going to do is use these kinds of figures to encourage your volunteers and your stakeholders to go forward with the project using citizen science as a base to go forward. So 17% of these peer-reviewed publications that focused on monarchs since 1940, I had to look at that twice, since 1940 have used data from citizen science projects, and these were drawn up in a paper, which you can see here, Rees and Oberhauser, if you want to look that up. Project websites provided summaries of project findings and publications, raw data, and other information. There's a lot more information out there on citizen science and its different applications. There's also information on its applications for educational use, which is my favorite way to use it, obviously. With Katie's intro, I spend a lot of time with kids. I think that the validation in our urban and suburban landscapes, so much of that, it was really hard for me to sit still while you were going over some of your figures with your Monarch Hero workshops, because I've been involved with Monarch Hero workshops, and it's a wonderful and gratifying way to bring children into the conservation world. They invest themselves in that. So in closing, I just want to say that if you really care about where your resources are going, and you really care about whether the project continues with or without you as you move along, then you might take a look at citizen science as an alternative to really collaborate with the people that you're sitting in this room with today. So thank you very much for your time.